Do you ever get the feeling that you've been cheated? That's what Johnny Rotten said to the crowd in San Francisco, the last concert of the Sex Pistols during their original run. I think a lot of folks on the American left are asking themselves the same question, or they're at least acknowledging that they do in fact feel cheated. For decades, the American left has lionized Noam Chomsky as kind of a demigod, and now there is more and more damning information about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, there's no allegations that Chomsky availed himself of, the underage girls that Epstein surrounded himself with. But he did, his wife called Epstein their best friend. He writes a letter of advice to Epstein on how he might handle the press and sympathizes with him, the torture that he's going through. Not think about the young women, or I should say the young girls, but the torture that Epstein is enduring. There's a certain point. He says the horrible way you are being treated in the press. Well, if you mess around with teenage girls, underage girls, you're probably going to be treated not in the nicest way in the world. So the left is having a reckoning of sorts with regard to Chomsky. Not all, some people are defending Chomsky. I looked at some of the headlines. There's a guy named Justin Brown who wrote a piece in defense of Noam Chomsky. He called him an elderly academic who maintained a friendship with someone who turned out to be a predator. I don't know that he turned out to be a predator. He had been convicted of being a predator over a decade before, or a decade or so before, I should say. MS Now said this, the article there said a significant part of his legacy undermines his principles. There's a guy named Ralph Leonard, writing for the New Statesman, and the headline of his article is "Chomsky Reputation Will Never Recover from the Epstein Files." And then there's a guy named Chris Knight. Chris Knight wrote, "There are two Chomskys." This is how he rationalizes it all. There was a good Chomsky who was against the Vietnam War, against the U.S. military-industrial complex, and then there was this bad Chomsky that we all didn't see. So, in other words, the implication that we can't be held accountable for turning this guy into a hero. Make no mistake about it, the left regarded this guy as a hero. If you look at Prospect Magazine in 2005, they ranked Chomsky in some sort of poll that he was the most important intellectual in the world. He was the number one intellectual in the world, public intellectual. There was a analysis of scholarly journals to see who was cited the most, what sources cited the most in scholarly journals. Chomsky was number 8. He was the most cited living figure in scholarly journals from 1980 to 1982. He was ahead of Hegel, but behind the Bible and Shakespeare, behind Aristotle. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Good Will Hunting, but there's a scene in which, it's a goofy scene, in which Matt Damon, who's playing the titular character, is in Robin Williams' office, and he talks about being blown away by A People's History of the United States, that goofy book that Howard Zinn wrote. I reviewed that years ago. I wrote about it in the same chapter in my book, Intellectual Morons, that I wrote about Chomsky, because they're almost sort of like two sides of the same coin, Zinn and Chomsky. And Robin Williams responds that, what about Noam Chomsky? What about manufacturing consent? So this is their way of name-dropping their heroes, at least Damon and Affleck, name-dropping their heroes in the movie that they made. Chomsky was obviously a big deal to these people, not so much anymore. All these people are kind of have this we're talking about we're talking about movies, so let's make another movie reference. They're having this shocked Casablanca response to Chomsky, how could he betray us? How could he have defended a really rotten guy? This isn't like Chomsky we know. I disagree. And the Khmer Rouge started murdering Cambodians, and they started forcing Cambodians to wear all black, as if the country was a giant sports team. And Pol Pot wanted to abolish glasses, that glasses were a symbol of vanity. And he thought that people really didn't need glasses, that they were just being pretentious. And so, you had insane people running Cambodia, and they killed about 1 million people or so, out of a population of, I think, of 8 or 10 million or something. Not a very big population. So it was one of the most ghastly acts of barbarism in human history would happen in Cambodia in the late 1970s, and Chomsky defended it. He wrote in a review in The Nation in 1977 with a co-author that at most thousands of people have been killed, and really these were mainly in places outside of Khmer Rouge control. If you move forward a few years, when the shoe was on the other foot, so to speak, when we went into Afghanistan after 9/11, he said that the evidence against bin Laden was surprisingly thin. It wasn't surprisingly thin. I mean, bin Laden admitted it at a certain point. He boasted about it. In the early days of our response to 9/11 in Afghanistan, he called it a silent genocide. He said that we were in the process of murdering millions of people, between 3 and 4 million people. Of course, nothing like that happened. Just like, not thousands of people died in Cambodia, it was 1 million or so. So he downplays it when the communists are doing something. But when the Americans are doing something legitimate, responding to 9/11, and trying to get the perpetrators of that act, the architects of it, bin Laden and his cohorts, his response to that is to exaggerate, is to say, oh no, we're going to kill millions of people. Well, nothing like that happened. You go through his body of work, and it's just all... you can predict what he's going to say. We did quite a bit to defeat the Nazis, obviously, and he depicted the post-war world as sort of a conspiracy between the United States and former Nazis. The people that we killed, we were somehow now becoming them, and that they were in cahoots with the United States. Much later, during the Reagan administration, he cited some study where they said, well, the standard of living is equal in Cuba as it is in the United States. And I mean, this was ridiculous enough, but Chomsky said, oh, well, actually, no, it's not equal. It's better in Cuba if you take into consider such things as like infant mortality in Chicago and on Navajo reservations, and if you take into consideration the egalitarian quality of Cuba. So he has been, touting nonsense for years, and the left has made a hero of him for being a liar for years, for basically getting it wrong. For as long as he did. And now they're saying, oh, look at this. Look how wild it is. Noam Chomsky got it wrong. This is a moral failing of Noam Chomsky. Well, didn't he get it wrong about Pol Pot? Didn't he get it wrong about 9/11 and bin Laden? I mean, he got it wrong about a whole host of people. Didn't he get it wrong about Fidel Castro? Jeffrey Epstein, who Chomsky accepted money from. Chomsky had all sorts of dinners with, went to visit him in New Mexico, stayed at his apartment in Paris and in New York. Jeffrey Epstein is hardly the only ne'er-do-well villain who Noam Chomsky has cozied up to. And I think rather than a reckoning of Chomsky, who is a 97-year-old man who can neither walk nor speak at this point, I don't know that you have a reckoning against someone that I don't know if Chomsky understands what's going on. Rather than a reckoning for him, I think a more healthy thing to do would be for the American left to look at themselves and say, why did we make a hero of this guy all these years? What's wrong about our beliefs that we thought Noam Chomsky was as great as he was? Where did we go wrong? But the left's not going to do that. They never look at themselves. They always externalize and blame others. If you write something as ridiculous as saying that a genocide in which 1 million people were killed was actually, thousands of people killed, and the people who killed them really can't be blamed that much. You write something like that, your reputation should be shot at that point. But it wasn't. And the reason it wasn't is because he flattered the American left's reflexive anti-Americanism. And because he did that, and he did it with sort of an air of a scholarly background at MIT, clearly he's a very bright guy. And he in linguistics, a lot of people say he did great work, and maybe he did. I'm not qualified to say he did or he didn't. But what I will say is when he butted his nose into politics, he didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't base it on evidence the way scientists base their views on evidence. Instead, he based his views on impulse. It was sort of a reflexive impulse to support his side, which was whatever side was against America. He looked at an event, he interpreted it in a way that would best flatter his ideology, and he sort of worked backwards. He sort of reversed engineered his answers from there. And that's why he got it so wrong about Cambodia and Cuba and so many other places. I think that kind of thinking may be why he got it wrong about Jeffrey Epstein, because Jeffrey Epstein was giving him money, was apparently giving him good financial advice, and he said, this guy's a good guy. Well, he wasn't a good guy. He was a bad guy. I'm not convinced Noam Chomsky was a good guy either.